On 15 October 1861, a 39-year-old Union colonel was leading his first troops into combat as commander of the 21st Regiment of Infantry. His objective was Confederate Colonel Thomas Harris, whose troops held the small town of Florida, Missouri, 25 miles south of the 21st Regiment's position in Cairo, Illinois. Though this Union colonel was a combat veteran of the Mexican War, now he was in charge of nearly 1,000 men marching through increasingly deserted towns as he closed on his objective. With each mile, his heart rose higher in his throat, anticipating contact with the enemy and all the blame that would fall on him should his mission fail, all the while reevaluating every decision he had made. Then the colonel and his regiment crested a hill overlooking the Confederate-held town, only to find the defenses deserted. This colonel was Ulysses S. Grant, and he had a major epiphany that day as he realized Colonel Thomas Harris feared Grant as much as Grant had feared Harris. It was a lesson he never forgot, and though he often felt anxiety as he approached contact with the enemy, he never again had that same fear that caused him to continually second-guess himself. Ulysses S. Grant documented this incident in his personal memoirs, memoirs he never intended to write, unlike hundreds of his contemporaries who indeed wrote their memoirs. Then former President Grant's personal financial situation collapsed, and he reluctantly agreed to write 4 articles for the Century magazine, who in turn convinced him to write his memoirs. During Grant's first year's encampment as a cadet at West Point, Lieutenant General Winfield Scott visited and reviewed the cadets. Cadet Grant thought General Scott the finest specimen of manhood he had ever seen. General Scott, commander of the United States Army, was quite large, 6'5", and wore a resplendent uniform that impressed the 5'2" Grant immensely. In fact, Grant admitted a fleeting presentiment that he would one day occupy his place in reviewing troops. When Grant graduated the academy and ordered his first uniform, he was quite excited to see how he looked when he finally donned it. When his infantry officer uniform finally arrived, he put it on and set out on horseback for Cincinnati, feeling distinctly like General Scott. Then a dirty little street urchin saw him and made fun of his uniform. A second similar incident took place in his hometown of Bethel, where a stable hand had sewn a strip of cotton down the side of his blue pants in direct imitation of Grant's uniform. Once again, the locals found it hugely enjoyable at Grant's expense. Both these incidents immediately recalled to Grant's mind the time as a young boy he bought a horse at his father's direction and told the dealer exactly how high he was allowed to bid. This story was retold throughout the town and was an embarrassment he would never live down. This demonstrated Grant's sensitive vulnerability to ridicule, as he was never an angry, overbearing, self-righteous type who would defend himself against any laughter at his expense. Grant would just endure it and move on. The truth was that Ulysses Grant was always a humble man, and people knew they could laugh at his expense and never face retribution. But for Grant, it gave him a distinct distaste, and he never again paid much attention to wearing the splendid uniform in the style of General Scott. This was confirmed during his time in the Mexican War, when he had an opportunity to see General Zachary Taylor in action. Taylor surprisingly never paid attention to his uniform, wearing the plainest available, so much so that his rank was not apparent, except that every soldier in his army had seen him before and knew exactly who he was. Grant found Taylor's style eminently relatable, and so during the Civil War, Grant wore the most workplace uniforms, and both his men and his officers no doubt appreciated that about him. Many commanding officers delegate responsibilities to their staff, but one of the lessons learned by Grant was to see the battlefield for yourself. Grant saw this in action with General Taylor, who would regularly observe the potential or current field of battle, often without any accompanying staff. Taylor also refrained from notifying commanders that he was about to visit their units, ensuring that he got a realistic, unprepared view of that unit. Though Grant respected General Winfield Scott immensely, Scott was the exact reverse. He always wore the maximum prescribed uniform and gave his commanders warning of all visits so that the dog and pony show would be well prepared. Grant emulated Taylor's method and ensured he got a good look at the prospective battlefields and was in the best location to observe a battle underway, to see how it was going, to make necessary adjustments, including taking advantage of any opportunities. Grant also observed that General Winfield Scott wrote out all of his orders for his commanders as if he expected they would one day be incorporated into the history books. Scott was also very precise in his language, with a particular style where he often referred to himself in the third person. General Taylor, by contrast, was not a conversationalist at all, but would speak his mind in just a few well-chosen words. His orders were so clear that there could be no mistaking his intent. Though Grant enjoyed working with both generals, he found his own uniform, speaking, and writing styles were in line with General Taylor. Grant's writing ability was influenced, no doubt, by his reading habits. Though he rarely read a military lesson twice during his time at West Point, Grant did read innumerable novels drawn from the West Point library. The fact that he had read so much of the best prose writers of his day no doubt enhanced his ability to write cogent sentences, paragraphs, and ultimately reports. All officers must write reports, quartermaster reports, battle plans, campaign plans, reports of actions, orders to subordinates, a nearly endless amount of writing, and Grant's ability to be clear and concise made for little to no errors in understanding from both his subordinates and superiors. Grant's skills as a writer were not known until much later in his life, when he was desperate for money and agreed to write those 4 articles. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he had never written about his time in the war, a service that had made him the epic national hero and propelled him into the presidency. But now, in seeking funds for his family, he undertook to write articles for the New Century magazine. His first article on the Battle of Shiloh was almost rejected by his editor, who instead taught him how to turn his matter-of-fact military style into something that was more personal and engaging, and thus more relatable to the reader. That was all it took, and his 4 articles were well received by both the Century magazine and by the public at large. Then Ulysses S. Grant was diagnosed with terminal throat and tongue cancer. In an attempt to provide for his wife Julia, he agreed to write his memoirs. He worked 4 to 6 hours daily with the assistance of his sons and the great American writer Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain. In a superhuman effort, stoically enduring tremendous pain that affected his ability to swallow any sustenance, Grant wrote or dictated 336,000 words that astounded Samuel Clemens. His only freedom from pain were opiates that also affected his ability to think and write, so he resorted to this relief sparingly. In that last year of his life, Grant produced what is considered one of the most popular and critically acclaimed autobiographies of American literature. He finished his work on 16 July, 1885, and died 1 week later. His book sold an astounding 300,000 copies, providing Julia financial stability for the rest of her life.